the psychology of people who keep falling for emotionally unavailable partners. You knew within the first few conversations. Something in you registered it. Some quiet signal that this person was not going to be easy to reach. Maybe they were inconsistent, warm one day and distant the next. Available when they wanted something and hard to find when you needed them. Maybe there was someone else in the picture, an ex they had not fully left, a life they had not fully committed to. Maybe there was just a quality in them, something slightly sealed, something that suggested the deeper rooms were locked and you were not getting a key, and you chose them anyway. Not despite that signal, because of it, because the part of you that should have said, "This is not what I need," said something else entirely. It said, "This is a puzzle I can solve. This is a person I can reach. If I love them the right way, if I am patient enough, consistent enough, understanding enough, eventually they will open, eventually they will see what this could be. Eventually the warmth I have felt in the good moments will become the steady thing. I just have to stay long enough to get there. You have been there before, and before that." The specific person changes, but the architecture is always the same. Someone with a wall. Someone who gives just enough to keep you there and not enough to let you rest. Someone who is most compelling precisely when they are least available. And you, pouring everything into the gap between who they occasionally are and who you know they could be, exhausting yourself in the reaching, wondering somewhere underneath it all why this keeps happening. Because it is not bad luck, it is not a coincidence, and it is not a flaw in your character, it is a pattern. And patterns have origins, and understanding the origin of this one is the only thing that actually changes it. Let us start with what emotionally unavailable actually means. Not distant, not introverted, not someone who takes longer to open up. Emotional unavailability is something specific. It is the chronic inability or unwillingness to show up fully in the emotional landscape of a relationship, to be present not just physically, but in the ways that actually sustain a connection. To receive someone's love without immediately retreating from it. To be known, not just encountered. To allow a relationship to deepen past the point where depth requires vulnerability. Emotionally unavailable people are often extraordinarily compelling in the early stages of a relationship. They are frequently charming, interesting, self-sufficient in ways that read as strength. The very quality that will later cause pain, the sealed quality, the not fully there-ness, reads initially as mystery, as depth, as someone worth pursuing. And there is a particular type of person for whom that quality is not just attractive, but magnetic, irresistible, in a way that bypasses reason and lands directly in the nervous system. That person is almost always someone who learned, very early, that love was something you earned, rather than something you simply received. Think about what it would mean to grow up in an environment where emotional attunement was inconsistent, where love came in waves rather than steadily, where a parent was sometimes warm and present and sometimes cold and unreachable, and you could never quite predict which version was going to be there when you arrived. In that environment, a child learns something very specific about love. They learn that it is conditional, that it requires work, that the warm version is the reward for doing something right, and the cold version is the punishment for doing something wrong, even when no one can tell you exactly what you did. More than that, they learn that the pursuit of the unavailable warmth is the primary emotional task. The child does not get to rest in love that is consistently there. They are always working for it, always reading the room, always calibrating, adjusting, trying to find the configuration of themselves that will produce the response they need. And the moments when it works, the moments when the warm version arrives, are extraordinary. Not just pleasant, extraordinary. Because they were earned. Because they came after the uncertainty. Because the relief of them is proportional to the anxiety that preceded them. This is the template. And when that child grows up and begins to form romantic attachments, the nervous system does not look for love that is easy and consistent. It looks for love that is familiar. And familiar means intermittent. Familiar means working for it. Familiar means that specific mixture of anxiety and relief. of reaching and occasionally being reached, of warmth that arrives unpredictably and therefore feels more precious than warmth that is simply always there. The secure person, the person who was consistently loved as a child, finds an emotionally unavailable partner exhausting very quickly. The inconsistency registers as a red flag rather than a challenge. The withholding reads as indifference rather than depth. They do not find it compelling because their nervous system was not trained on it. It does not feel like home to them. But for you it does. That is the painful honesty of it. The emotionally unavailable person does not just attract you despite the unavailability. The unavailability is part of what produces the attraction. Not because you want to suffer, but because your nervous system learned a long time ago that this is what love feels like. Uncertain, worth fighting for, possible but not guaranteed. And the pursuit of it activates every skill you spent your childhood developing. The reading of moods, the careful management of another person's emotional state, the extraordinary sensitivity to the slightest shift in temperature. You are extraordinarily good at this, because you have been practicing it your whole life. Now let us talk about what actually happens inside these relationships. Because understanding the mechanics is part of understanding why they are so hard to leave. There is a psychological principle called intermittent reinforcement. It was first studied in the context of animal behavior, where researchers found that the most persistent and compulsive responses were not produced by consistent rewards, but by unpredictable ones. The animal that was fed randomly, sometimes after pressing the lever and sometimes not, pressed the lever far more compulsively and for far longer than the animal that was fed every time. Because inconsistency creates a particular kind of urgency, the brain cannot settle, it cannot predict, and so it stays alert, stays engaged, stays trying, long after a rational assessment would suggest stopping. This is exactly the neurological experience of loving an emotionally unavailable person. The warmth, when it comes, is not just pleasant. It is a relief so intense it registers as euphoria. The dopamine hit of finally being reached by someone who is usually out of reach is categorically different from the warmth of someone who is simply always warm. And the brain, which is always optimizing for reward, learns to associate the unavailable person with the possibility of that particular hit, not the hit itself, the possibility of it. And possibility is more addictive than certainty. This is why you cannot talk yourself out of it with logic. Why you can know intellectually that this person is not going to change, that the good moments are not going to become the consistent reality, that you have been here before with a different face and the same architecture, and still find yourself unable to leave. Because you are not being driven by a rational assessment. You are being driven by a neurological process that has been running since childhood and that has been activated in this relationship in a way that feels completely beyond your control. And there is something else happening that is worth naming directly. When you are in a relationship with an emotionally unavailable person, you are not just pursuing them, you are trying to rewrite a story. The story that was written in childhood. The story that said the love you needed was always just out of reach. That if you could just be better, more patient, more understanding, more lovable, it would finally arrive. Every time you try harder with the unavailable partner, you are also, at a level below conscious thought, trying harder with the parent who could not give you what you needed. Every breakthrough in the relationship, however temporary, is also a brief resolution of a much older wound, and every withdrawal is a repetition of it. This is not a metaphor. This is how the brain actually processes it. The attachment system does not make clean distinctions between the past and the present. It runs the same programs across all attachment relationships. And when someone activates those programs in the specific way that your primary attachments did, the emotional response is not just about them. It is about everything that came before them. This is why leaving is so much harder than it should be. Why you feel, when you try to go, not just the loss of this particular person, but something much older and much larger. A grief that is not proportional to the relationship. Because you are not just grieving this relationship, you are grieving the original one. The one where you first learned that the love you needed was not reliably there. Now let us talk about what actually changes this. Because it does change. Not quickly, not through willpower, not through deciding to make better choices, as if the choice was simply a matter of deciding, but through a process that goes deep enough to address what is actually driving it. The first shift is the one we have already begun in this conversation: recognition, not just of the pattern, I keep choosing unavailable people, but of the why underneath it, of the specific way your nervous system learned to understand love, of the template that was set before you had any say in the matter, of the fact that the unavailability is not incidental to the attraction but central to it, because until you see that clearly, you will keep being surprised by the pattern. You will keep believing that this time is different, that this particular person is the exception, that the warmth you occasionally feel is the real thing finally arriving rather than the intermittent reward that is keeping you in the game. The second shift is in what you notice, specifically learning to notice the feeling of ease as attractive rather than suspicious. Because for many people who grew up in emotionally inconsistent environments, someone who is consistently warm and available does not initially produce attraction. They produce a mild unease. Something feels too easy, too steady, too available. The nervous system, trained on uncertainty, reads consistency as flatness rather than safety. And the temptation is to interpret that unease as a lack of chemistry rather than as what it actually is, which is the absence of the anxiety the nervous system learned to associate with love. This is one of the most important reframes available. When you meet someone who is emotionally available, who is consistent, who does not make you work for their warmth, and you feel that faint sense of something missing, that is not a signal that they are wrong for you. That is a signal that they are different from what you are used to. And different from what you are used to, when what you are used to has been hurting you, is exactly where you should be looking. The third shift is the slowest and the deepest. It is the internal one, the work of grieving the original loss, of acknowledging that the love you needed when you were young was not consistently there. Not with anger, not with blame, but with the simple, honest recognition that something was missing that should have been present, and that the absence of it shaped you in ways that are still running, and that those ways can change, not all at once, not without difficulty, but they can change, because the nervous system is not fixed. The attachment patterns laid down in childhood are powerful, but they are not permanent. They change through new experience, through relationships, therapeutic or otherwise, where the consistency of the warmth is allowed to slowly replace the old expectation of intermittence. Through the experience of being reliably received and discovering that it does not produce the flatness you feared, but something else, something that takes longer to recognize as what it is because it is so different from what you were trained to expect. Something called security, something that, once you have felt it genuinely, makes the old excitement of the unavailable feel like what it always was. Not love, the anticipation of love, the simulation of it, the shape of the longing without the thing itself. You are not broken. You are not addicted to pain. You are not fundamentally incapable of healthy love. You are someone whose understanding of love was shaped by an environment that made unavailability feel like home. And you have been going home ever since. The work is not to stop wanting love. The work is to slowly, carefully, with patience, and with help, update what home means. If this video names something that has been living in you as a pattern you could not explain, this channel was made for you. This is a space for the psychological origins of the things we do in love, the patterns that feel like personality but are actually history. If you want to keep exploring, subscribe and come back. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. When you think about the unavailable people you have loved, what was the feeling in the beginning that made you stay? You do not need to say everything. Even one word is enough. Thank you for watching.